Hey everyone, welcome back to Around the Table with the AOTR. Tonight on Authors of the Resistance, we were originally going to be talking to Dr. Nelva Lee. Unfortunately, we do have to reschedule with her, but that should be the next podcast episode. Nevertheless, I got Bev here.
Hey there, I hope everybody whatever time you're listening is having a good day.
So we got kind of a deep topic that we decided we're going to dive into tonight, but it's a very important one, and I'm going to start off by saying, as a reminder, if you are not aware, listeners, Beverly is a mental health professional in her other daytime job and also works a lot with LGBTQIA and also happens to fall within the spectrum, as do I. And there's a situation that has been brought to light within activism and advocacy that we simply cannot ignore. With everything that we have ever talked about here on this podcast and everything that we are in agreement and alignment on about human rights and causes that are very important to both of us, it's a really, really scary thing. So we're going to be talking about Dr. Christy Perez. Bev, what can you tell me that you've learned about this so far?
Well, I have learned that it is a very deep situation and it's exposing some very not great parts of the community and bringing to light some things that really, really need to be talked about.
So I'm going to put a little disclaimer here because we're going to be talking about very serious topics that are related to CSAM, abduction and human trafficking of minors as young as 15 years of age, pandering, and the exploitation of young trans girls. And I want to start off by saying that found out this information from a really good colleague and comrade, friend of mine by the name of Simona Bearcub, who is Lakota, which is Sioux, for those of you who may not know. And it was Simona who was the first person to whistleblow about the severity of what was happening with the situation with Dr. Christy Perez. And it's very important that I elaborate here, and I will put it in the show notes, some information from where people can go and fact check and look at the court documentation that proves that this person served time and was convicted of some horrendous offenses against children. And it's not that this person didn't serve their time for these crimes committed that we're so worried about. It's how this person has behaved and operated post release and how very alarming and dangerous it truly is. And I cannot make any diagnoses. However, I can elaborate on pattern behavior from my own experiences in advocacy and peer support. I used to do peer support for the Trevor Project, so I do feel that I have the ability to step in and speak on behalf of some of these things from experience in the field and having seen and observed things. But again, only a doctor can actually make those kind of diagnostics. So everything said here is based off of pattern recognition and the behavior that has been exhibited from this person themselves since the confrontation occurred with Simona Bearcub. And from there, I'm going to let Bev elaborate a little bit because I know that you talked a little bit about this with me before we started recording and you were just starting to get into why you felt this was so dangerous.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about these type of things, and of course, like I said, disclaimer, I may work in mental health, but I am not trying to give any sort of diagnoses or anything like that because it is unethical to do so when you are not actually working with a person. So I want to really emphasize that for anybody that's listening, that this is not going to be anything saying that I believe she's this or that, because that goes against our ethics. So with these type of behaviors, it influences everybody around them, and that influence can be I hate using the word toxic, but it really is toxic to those around them. And this setting up of side versus side in the community is extremely dangerous because it puts everybody at risk. And this is a very dangerous situation because we are dealing with a child trafficker who is also trans. And whenever we in the trans community get put on display, it brings out the really nasty members of the other side. And so the MAGA crowd and other things see that trans person as an example of, well, this is why all trans people are bad. Look at this person. And that's extremely harmful to the rest of us because one person doesn't make everybody like them. But the difficulty is that becomes what people see. The person in the headlines is what people see. people are scared of flying because of plane crashes, even though you're more likely to get in a car wreck because the headline is about a plane crash, not a car wreck. So it piles up with all of these deeds. And just the information that I've seen that Saya shared with me and showed me some of these records and everything, just the charges this woman has been under is, I'm almost at a loss for words. And that's how difficult this whole subject is because we're talking about children. We're talking about the most vulnerable people. We're talking about not only that, but trans children. Who is more vulnerable in our society than our trans youth? And that just floors me that we are openly welcoming a person into our community as an advocate that has done something like this. And yes, people can change. I have worked with people that have turned their life around after doing some pretty terrible things. That doesn't seem the case here. And I'm sure Sai has some more information on the recent events, but that is just my general overview of what I have seen so far.
So I'm going to kind of play back a little bit of what Bev's touching on here. And it's never easy to talk about any of these things. Like Bev just said, it really isn't. It doesn't matter how much healing you've been through. It doesn't matter how much therapy. I had to confront face to face Dr. Christy Perez, digitally anyway, and hold space in a place where revocation of consent for her to be present had been absolutely declared. There was no doubt in front of an exceptional number of very large creators. I mean, very large creators. I will not name anyone, but very well known people. And it was very, very, very difficult. And it was very messy. And I took a lot of arrows, but I did it because it had to be done. And the things that I allowed to occur by doing that exhibited to everyone in that chat room something called DARVO. And for those of you who may not know what that means, deny, attacked, reverse, victim, and offender. This was coined in 1997, a mental health clinician, to describe what happens when someone who's usually a part of the dark triad of personality types, Bev can go into that a little bit more in a minute, does to try to tear down a person once they have revealed the truth about their character. And there are several different types of narcissists. And with me, what I felt here, and again, this is just my pattern recognition, was malignant narcissism, very similar to the Epstein type of mentalities. And it very much reminded me of Ghislaine Maxwell, which should terrify most of you if you understand the depths of what that means. It was not easy. My identity was torn apart. My children were threatened. I was threatened. My character was brought into question. My ethnicity was brought into question. My reason for having the audacity to come to the table and cause such a scene, I was told to stop speaking on behalf of victims and victim advocates. And I want you guys to understand that this happened after these people had already done the same thing to Simona Bearcub, a Lakota, a Native American activist who helped just put Nathan Chasing Bull away. I want you guys to let that sink in. And had a bunch of flying monkeys. This is textbook narcissism 101. This is exactly what a smear campaign looks like. And so what I did in that chat room in front of everyone was allowed myself to be the victim of DARVO in order to prove a point. And that point was exactly what I told her. And it's on my TikTok videos too, and Instagram and a few other places. The one I did for MMIW Day just yesterday. I'm in the red dress with the red handprint on my face. It's very easy to find. If you follow me, you can see it. And you can hear exactly what I said, but to summarize it, I said the only thing this has done is proven that the toxic pattern of behavior that I predicted that you would bring into my communities is exactly what you brought. With the flying monkeys and the gang stalking and all the threats. And then the threats on someone's children. Again, going after a child. I want you guys to let that sink in. This person was charged and served time for going after children. And that was the first thing they tried to bring up. And not just with me, but also with Simona Bearcub. And got Simona Bearcub's Meta accounts taken down on allegations of fraud that we are still fighting with Meta right now because of the fact that Dr. Christy Perez is a convicted sex offender. Meta guidelines strictly prohibit any convicted sex offender from using their products because it is a liability to Meta. They've already been sued because of this, and yet they still have not reinstated Simona Bearcub, even though nothing she did was fraud under any single instance of Meta guideline, community guidelines. And we have been fighting with them for over a week. But they took Their AIs, first of all, are the first things that decided to shut her down. After these people went and mass reported her for having the audacity to stand up to this person who was coming into advocacy and activist spaces that Simona was in. And Simona wasn't going to have it. Simona stood up for victims and said, no, this is supposed to be a safe space. You cannot be here. And other people started attacking her character. Bev, what is that?
Yeah, so you mentioned the dark triad. So this is a very interesting subject, and one that I have to make a disclaimer on this. There is narcissism that is associated with the dark triad. There is also actual narcissistic personality disorder. That is a completely separate thing and is not associated with this cluster of symptoms related to the dark triad. Actual NPD is a little bit different, and yes, it does share, that does include narcissism, but actual NPD folks are going to be more likely to hurt themselves than anybody else. That is not the same thing as what we're talking about with the dark triad. I like to make that differentiation because sometimes NPD people are assumed to be like this.
Right. That's why I said make sure you know that there are 9 different types and I can't make any diagnoses. I can just talk about different
Right,
patterns.
absolutely. But a lot of the components of this, the reason it's called the dark triad is because it includes Machiavellianism, psychopathology, and narcissism. So those three things combined are what creates this personality. And it is so very dangerous because this psychopathy is antisocial behavior. And again, I'll make another difference here. Antisocial personality disorder, they are not necessarily antisocial personality disorder folks either. They just have those behaviors. And that is where you get the selfishness, lack of remorse, a lot of impulsivity. But the Machiavellianism is where you get the manipulation, kind of indifference to moral things, and just a focus on that self interest and that selfishness. The narcissism piece is where you have a lot of pride with them, grandiosity, feeling like they're the best, and just a general lack of empathy. And you can see how these three things combined really have a lot of impact on the people around them because they want things, they don't care how they get them, and they're not going to work with another person because that's just beyond their capability. You know, some sources say 7% of the population is going to fall in this category, but those will be about average on these, not high. If it's high, it's probably going to be far less, maybe around 1 to 2%. But you're talking about people who really enact these things. And now somebody can have these personality traits and never express them, just like any other personality disorder. If somebody is capable of controlling their emotions and controlling their stuff and have good coping skills and different things. So just a quick historical fact, this came about in 2002, and it's important to note that these three traits are what we consider subclinical. So they aren't enough to diagnose somebody with a particular disorder because it's below the clinical lines. So these are not people who have an actual diagnosis. They are people around us today that have these traits, and they are going to do some things. So, you know, they're going to be charming. That's a really big one. They often are the person leading other people. They are charismatic. They really, really get a sense of superiority by leading people and having people follow them. But the key is they don't care about the people that are following them either. And they just see them as a vehicle to put them on the pedestal that they want to be on. They do a lot of gaslighting, you know, making the other people, like we were talking about, switching the victim and aggressor roles. You know, they're going to do these things. And so now there is some people include sadism with these three traits, and that would be what I would consider a more extreme form of the dark triad. But whenever we're dealing with these, it's very hard for people to avoid falling into their sphere of influence because they're so charismatic, because they're convincing, because they know what to say and they know what to do, and they know they may not have empathy, but they know how to make people feel empathy towards them. And it is a very dangerous situation when you have somebody like that getting in control of something that needs to be out there to help people, because they're not out there to help. They're out there to get ahead and get recognition for whatever they want to get, and they are going to do whatever they have to do to get it. And if that means stepping on people, they're going to step on them. If it means, being contrite or pretending to be sorry, they're going to do that. They're going to manipulate emotions. They're going to do things like that. And it's important to realize that these people, you can't just pick them out of the crowd. You have to see, like Sai had said earlier, there are patterns, and patterns will show you the truth. But in these cases, you have to go back and find the patterns over time. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Now, like I said, I'm not going to diagnose anybody. I'm just giving information about the dark triad and what that is. I'm not saying that this is the case, but I think it's important that people understand it and make their own conclusions about things. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly everything Bev was describing. You have to look at the situations, and then you have to go look at documents and evidence in this case, and you have to understand that the whole reason why this person is actually on the sex registry in the state of Georgia. You need to understand what that means. The whole reason why a sex registry exists is so that you can have informed consent about what's going on around you to make adequate decisions for your safety spaces. Now, when it comes to advocacy and activism, these are spaces that without hesitation, the moment a predator is made to be known, and the moment a predator comes, let's just give it the opportunity. Let's give it the old good devil's advocate here, and it is somebody who's rehabbed, somebody who is reformed, and they come and they want to speak on something, and it is in a space that is normally supposed to be safe for advocates and the victims or survivors. People have different feelings about how to be called in that way. People that have experienced these things, okay, where they're supposed to be able to be safe. And when it is brought there, and the person that's supposed to be responsible for making sure those people stay safe is told this is what this person is, what needs to happen when revocation of consent occurs is that person doesn't get to say anything else. Like, that's it. Advocates and activists who are supposed to be supporting safe space for people who've experienced that are supposed to remove the predator. And it's an unfortunate occurrence with that case if you are a good person that has reformed, because that's just the way it goes. Just like you cannot go live beside a school. There's just some things you cannot do. You can't. You already messed that up for yourself, and you already know why. And if you actually were contrite, you would understand that's not a space you can be in. And anybody who tries to argue against the victims and their advocates who are telling you you have to remove this person is completely out of line. That in and of itself is the baseline. But to add on having a smear campaign, all of these other actions, the deflection, the darvo, the dismissing, the diminishing, the grandiosity. I'm a top 30 influencer. Who says that when you're talking about something like this? What is that? And again, I ask, with all these people that were present to see it, what did they think was going to occur when you started bringing my identity politics into this, when that has nothing to do with it? When the elephant in the room is the fact that there are people who are protecting a convicted creator of CSAM, of children in positions, and used meta products and Craigslist to solicit customers, to force these children into sexual servitude for no less than at least 2 Johns a month. I want you guys to let that sink in and then lock them in closets. That's what kind of sordid details are in these files. No. You don't get to come into these spaces and say anything to these victims. You don't get to tell their advocates they're wrong. You get to turn around and leave. And when revocation of consent occurs and you continue to push and then start trying to tear down a person that's standing there telling you, what are you doing after I've just told you you don't belong here? That is exactly the root of the problem. Informed consent was the problem from the get-go. If you do not understand that, you do not need to be an advocate, and you have no business in activism. How do you feel about that, Bev?
I think it's spot on. I mean, the idea that we don't want advocates to be perfect. Everybody's human. Everybody has a right to mistakes. However, there are some mistakes that you can't completely come back from. And child sex trafficking and CSAM, all of this stuff, it is one of them. And if Dr. Christy Perez was going to try to make good on the idea that she is reformed and that she is trying to now advocate for people that undergo what she put other people through, then she would have left. She would have stepped aside and said, "Okay, I'm out. You know, I got it. I leave." Because that is what somebody who is really wishing to reform themselves from doing things like that. They don't go after the people who express concern with the fact that a sexual predator has been allowed into a safe space. It's not their place to decide that they can just be there, because it's supposed to be a safe place. And though we don't ask for perfection, we do ask for people to have certain values. And it is obvious that those values are not present because of tearing down people just because they express concern. Everybody has a right to express concern about anybody else. And it is just an awful situation. And if she were reforming herself, would it suck that she wasn't allowed in that space? Yeah, it probably would for her, but it's still, she would have taken that. She would have taken it as, I've been told I can't be in this space. I will gracefully bow out. And that's what anybody who is reforming themselves is going to understand. And this, violent, I would call it violent attack on other people just because they express that concern, it reeks of, cultish behavior whenever somebody follows this person. And this is like I was talking about with those personalities. They are very charismatic and people follow them, and sometimes it becomes cultish, and they can do no wrong because they put them up on that pedestal and they don't see anything but what they want them to see. So, without, I hesitate to, offer any conclusions. I think you guys that are listening can draw your own conclusions about the situation. But, it's necessary that we keep safe spaces safe. And if one person does not feel safe because of somebody's presence, because they know that they have done the thing that they themselves are a survivor of, then that person needs to leave. Just one person. That's all that needs to feel unsafe. And advocates should know that. I think, we have safe spaces where sometimes men are not allowed because the survivors of those terrible things do not feel safe around any man. So if we are willing to build safe spaces without men, even whenever they haven't done anything, we have to have safe spaces from people who have done something. And with this situation, we know for a fact this happened. Time was served. These records exist. There's no denial of it. But it's as if this whole situation, those that are supporting this person, they're going to take whatever they can and smear anybody that has expressed those concerns. Would you agree that's kind of what you saw, Sai?
Well, that's absolutely what's occurred. And I think everybody that witnessed it has seen it too. It's unbelievable, honestly. It is, like I said in that video on TikTok that I'm telling everyone, if you want to see what I really had to say about it, was, it's the most absurd thing I have seen in all of my years of doing advocacy and activism. It is the most mind-boggling. But you know what? All it does, and I want to try not to cry as I say this, all it does is highlight what the Epstein class has done to this fucking country. It's fucking awful. I am so disgusted and I'm so terrified of what the repercussions of normalizing this is going to do to not just children, but to trans children and to trans adults, to anybody that has BIPOC trans family. This is horrible. This is the most horrible thing I have allowed myself to witness. And I came in to witness it because Simona needed somebody, and I could not believe what they were doing to her. And I knew I was going to be next. And sure enough, they played right into the booby trap. But see, only because I know pattern recognition did I know how this textbook play was going to go. And I talked to my own therapist even before to prep myself for what I knew was probably coming. I had to prep myself a lot, and it still hurt. And it's not because it's not me that couldn't take the heat. It's because of what I knew they were trying to normalize and what it would do to people I've been trying to protect. I can't, y'all do not, that's on your hands. That's on your hands. Simona and I have done everything to warn everyone. And if you normalize and protect this person, you are a pedophile protector. And you're just the same as MAGA. And to have the audacity to say that to me, thanks for the projection narcissism, is what I see. Can't diagnose, but The aura is stinking bad, and this is unacceptable behavior from anyone that wants to talk about advocacy. And
Absolutely. Absolutely. Advocacy is hard. We all know that. We don't need anything to make it harder. And that's exactly what this does. It also causes schisms in the advocacy community. It causes people to take sides. A divided community is not going to be as effective as the whole community working together. So it is important that we get rid of these influences that are going to do damage to that unity. And that's what has happened. It's caused the divide, and now we're dealing with the fallout.
I want to talk about a minute, like in the last tab we have here, about how closely tied manipulation and influence are. And we live in the creator community, we're a part of it. So when we talk about things like cult mentality, these things get brought up a lot because this is happening a lot. This is happening a lot. And it's not just MAGA. See, there are micro cliques too. And there are things, and there's gang stalking, and there's cyber stalking, and there's crazy stuff happening. And this is happening more online than actually in person in a lot of cases these days. And doxing is illegal in a lot of places because of the danger that it actually puts for people and their families. There's no doubt about that. So, yeah, talk about the difference in influence and manipulation and how they can be used to sway people and the artist's suggestions, persuasive behavior, and how that ties to pandering.
Yeah, so if we think about influencers, first let's start there. So we're talking about influencers, and there are all kinds of influencers, right? And what we see when we see influencers is we see what they want us to see. We see the things that they believe are going to get them views. And a lot of times those influencers, and it may be something like skincare influencers, right? I've run across cancer influencers, as strange as that sounds, but they project a certain kind of view of themselves, and it's like a corner of their personality, right? We don't see everything. Now, whenever we're talking about manipulation is a complicated issue because it can be as simple as trying to get someone on your side and, offering them something in return. You're manipulating with a reward. And it comes down to some basic psychology like operant conditioning, classical conditioning. All of these things can be used by people that are manipulating others. Those that are good about it know what they're doing. It's not accidental. And influencers can manipulate their audiences very easily. And because whenever you are in front of the camera, you're showing them what you want to show them, what you think they're going to believe. And then once you catch them in your influencer circle, you can easily manipulate them by telling them what they need to believe. We have, for example, I follow a dermatology doctor, right? These skin influencers will do things like something called skin flooding, which is where you use like 50, 60 products on your face at one time. Well, the dermatologist, of course, says that's useless. It's not going to do anything. But these influencers convince people that they need to do this, and these people go out and buy tons and tons of products because they've been manipulating. And half the time you come to find out that these influencers are getting some sort of payback from these products, the people that own these products who are making money off of them, right? Because they're manipulating people into buying what they want them to buy. Because they're saying, oh, look how wonderful this is, and look how great my skin looks. Well, they're showing you what they want to show you, and you don't have any idea how many filters. But that's just an example, right? It goes deeper than that whenever we're talking about other kinds of influencers and whenever people get attached to them. And, the whole idea and how it relates to the whole idea of pandering. The first thing that we think about whenever we're seeing this is the exploitation of weakness, right? It's also exploitation of vices, desires, needs, wants, all of those things. So, if you change your view to doing this in like political sense, people will change their view according to that. Now, in legal sense, this of course refers to arranging prostitution. And when I say the word prostitution, I am referring to specifically, I'm not referring to sex work. I am referring to being forced into the situation. I'm going to use that as a defining difference right here. Sex work is a different category. Those are people that are doing things of their own volition and not being coerced of any sort. So this pandering is this encouraging, procuring, arranging for these people to basically be trafficked. And, we are talking about a very serious crime. It's brothels offering any offer to arrange a meeting, right? This is all pandering. So, this is a serious offense. It's a felony in many places and can just, I think it's somewhere in the Midwest, it's a class 2 felony. So that's a pretty severe situation, right? But basically, whenever we're talking about this confluence of this manipulation from an influencer who's guilty of pandering in the criminal context, right? We're talking about just this manipulation from their part. First, they manipulate whenever they manipulate people into the situation that they are pandering for. But also, they're manipulating the people that are watching that they didn't do the thing. They didn't do anything. They aren't guilty of pandering. They aren't, they're not at fault. And, this is obviously very clearly in this case not true, but that manipulation brings people to their side because they're an influencer. They influence people. And that's where the term comes from. It's the basic point of being an influencer is you're trying to influence people to do something, whether you're trying to influence them to talk, whether you're influencing them to buy, whatever you're influencing them for. And whenever we're talking about somebody that is guilty of pandering and we know that fact, and then they are manipulating their influencer audience into supporting them, that's a problem. That's a big problem. And it is all a matter of that convincing people that what they've done is not toxic, that what they've done was not their fault, that, they had no choice in the matter. But whenever it comes down to it, they don't show any remorse for what happened, and there never was remorse to start with. But so, yeah, it's quite a fascinating thing whenever you get down into each part of it. So, yeah, I believe that's what you were referring to, right?
Yeah, so I got a little thing here. And like Bev was saying, so this, and I was talking a little bit about the art of suggestion. Well, the art of suggestion, and you can go find resources to back what I'm about to say up. But anyway, the art of suggestion serves as a psychological engine for persuasion. And the ethical distinction between influence and manipulation depends on whether this engine is used to empower the recipient or to exploit them. And that's a big thing to highlight here. So, then that moves me to the role of suggestion in influence and persuasion. So, suggestion is the subtle art of planting an idea in the subconscious mind so that the individual will eventually adopt it on their own. Now, that can be used for a good or bad thing, okay? Like, it really just depends on how it's being deployed, okay? So, rational persuasion, ethical persuasion uses suggestions alongside transparent data, which is a big highlight point here, and logic, which again, we've kind of a little bit talked about this, and some of this is based on emotions, but it's also based on logic and different kinds of clinical, responses and studies that people have seen in advocacy spaces for these kinds of things. So there's, informed consent, and there's also being trauma informed. There's certain things you start to just know, and you adopt that etiquette when you work in these spaces. That is a mandatory thing. If you want to work in these spaces, you have to be able to deal with these kind of circumstances. So again, rational persuasion, right? We're persuading you to understand the logic behind why this is not something we can allow to normalize, right? Okay. Then there's that influence for good from that. Influence is usually the good. The persuasion variable on that side is usually to have a good outcome. Manipulation we usually associate with bad, right? That seems pretty easy, but you got to understand that this is basically yin and yang. This is two sides of the same coin depending on who's using it and how. So that influence for good. So leaders can use influence to achieve a collective goal, like rallying people to come to a protest or something like that, and often rely on suggestion to inspire without directly delving into coercion, which is not okay, which is a bad thing. And then that links to pandering and manipulation when suggestion is used without transparency and for a purely selfish end, and it crosses the line into manipulating another person in ways that are harmful. Like, I think that's pretty simple, right? So pandering as a suggestive tool involves appealing specifically to an audience's existing prejudices, hidden desires, and all the things that Bev already told you in a preconceived notion to gain favor. So they believe they're going to get something grandier, basically, or whatever thing they need or feel they need to have. In this context, suggestion is used to mirror what that person wants to hear and bypasses their critical thinking, making them more pliable. These are vulnerable people usually, so they are considered easy targets, naive, gullible, whatever the case may be, homeless. There's a lot of variables that could come into play here on how someone ends up being trafficked. There's a lot of things that happen. These things are basically the general, like, that's why they say watch out for like the super great modeling deal or whatever, those kinds of things. But it's not always like that. It can come out, just you need a place to stay. And then the next thing you know, you're having to do things that you didn't know you were going to have to do. And things are totally different. So there comes in that emotional exploitation where manipulation often leverages suggestion to trigger a strong emotion, such as fear, guilt, or greed. And that impairs the judgment and prevents rational deliberation within, the person that is the target, right? So then there comes hidden intent. And that is the core difference between intent and transparency. Persuasion is honest about its motives, but manipulation hides its self serving nature to ensure the victim does not realize that they're going to be used. Because if the victim realizes, then it doesn't work. To look at some key differences at a glance, you got to look at the feature, the persuasion and influence, and then the manipulation. So if the feature intent shows the persuasion or influence is a mutual benefit, a win-win, that's good, right? Usually we would think that's good. Manipulation would be self-serving where it's win-lose. This is the most simplistic ways, but sometimes it's not that great. Black and white, it's more gray. Then there's transparency. If it's open and honest about goals and people are, being forthcoming, this is what we're trying to do. It's a partnership. We're doing this. Like if me and Bev decided we were going to do, a co-written book or something. We agreed we're doing it, whatever. That's agreed. So then you would be completely open about what we're trying to do. So manipulation would be opaque or deceptive and would be like where we made an agreement and then somebody was going back. Neither one of us would do this, but we're kind of, and this does happen in the industry, y'all, just to say it does happen. You'll know by these types of patterns. And that's why we're talking about pattern recognition. Then there's also the method, which is our logic, facts, and open suggestion happening? Is it an open dialogue between the persons that are going to be involved? Those kind of things. Or is deception, fear, and hidden suggestion, or even avoidance, or diminishing, or dismissal, or pretending like it doesn't exist? These are all things that happen to victims. Those are manipulative. Then there's auto-suggestion, and that is where it's like encouraging you, like when someone's talking to you and they're encouraging you to have open dialogue and have open, independent thought, to add your opinions, to be critical if you need to be, where you think you need to be, without, of course, degrading, constructive criticism, those kinds of things, where you're able to actually speak and not feel like you have to shrink, basically. So those are open dialogues, and they're engaging where people are able to make consenting, informed consent decisions. And that's influencing and working to persuade to come to a deal. That's when it's good. Then there's the other one, which is auto-suggestion, where it seeks to control or puppet behavior within the respondent, whatever person that they're targeting. So these things, like all of this stuff, if you look it all up and you study it for yourself and you learn the difference between influence and manipulation, then you can start to line up these things with those patterns. What are you seeing regularly from this person? Is this person deploying Darvo? Is this person actually contrite? And so that's basically the highlight of what Bev and I are trying to tell you guys tonight. Links to things about this, and the evidence is open public information. And like I said, Christy is on the state registry for sex offenses in Georgia because of what she was convicted of and served time for. All of her aliases from before, when she was actually arraigned and everything, under her dead name, which I'm not going to say because I respect that. But you can correlate the pattern, and you can correlate these different things to how the response has come through the advocacy and activism community and what Simona and I have experienced. And it's really just awful, honestly. What would you say about that, Bev?
Yeah, one of the things I find interesting is that we're literally talking about pandering in both contexts. And I find that fascinating in a kind of sick and twisted sort of way that this would encompass both of those types of pandering. And, the just this whole situation, something has to happen. And I'm hoping that the things that happen is that the community decides what to do, what's right, and realizes what's going on with that manipulation, and that when an influencer gets the chance to manipulate to get their desire, it can lead to some pretty unfortunate things, if you want to put it that way. But I'm still absolutely floored by the whole situation, and I am super proud of my co-host for doing what she has done in this situation, and I give her all the kudos and support I possibly can for that.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. I guess this is a moment in this last 10 minutes that we have where we can talk about how you are doing. Let's get an update from you on what's been going on with you as far as your process with the chemo and everything. If you don't want to talk about it, we don't have to, but if you want to, we can maybe get a call to action for your GoFundMe or something.
Sure, yeah. So I am on May 20th. I have my last chemo. Yay. So far, I haven't had any further troubles with my chemo port, which I'm hoping it lasts through the last one. And then after that, when I have my scans. So far, everything is looking good. The cancer antigen marker that they track has gone down to 2.2 from 10.6 whenever I started chemo. So that means that the number of cancer antigens in my blood has decreased as chemo has gone forward. Though, if it's under 35, you're fine for the most part. It's only used as a marker to see if chemo is working. So, obviously, it's working because it's gone down. Yeah, it's been a rough go, but I think the hardest part has been missing work because I hate missing work. And of course, well, there's the financial thing because there's so much that whenever you start the year already owing your out of pocket maximum within the first week, it can make for an interesting time trying to pay all the bills at the same time when you're missing a lot of work as well. But yeah, if anybody wants to contribute to the GoFundMe, I'd appreciate it. I also know that things are tough for everybody, so I don't expect anything from anybody in particular. If you can, great. If you can't, hey, we're all in the same boat these days in a lot of cases. So I get that. So, yeah, but anyways, it's about to come to an end. Well, as much of an end as anybody with cancer comes to. Anyways, because after, if as long as all my scans are clear, I will go on a rotation of every 3 months visiting my oncologist. Unfortunately, that's an hour drive, so that's going to be fun. And as long as there are no recurrences within the first 2 years, then it will turn into a 6 month for 3 years. And then after 5 years, I will only have to go every year. So that's the plan. I'm hoping to get to that 5 year mark because that's usually when you're safest after first round of cancer. But it's important to note that if you have people with cancer in your life, they may not talk about it, but cancer is kind of a chronic illness from then on. It never really goes away. It's always in the wings and can always recur no matter how much treatment somebody's had. And you always have the same type of cancer that you had before unless you develop a brand new cancer. So if mine was ovarian cancer, so it would be the clear cell carcinoma if it recurred somewhere else, most likely. So I could have clear cell carcinoma, which is an ovarian cancer, in my lungs. So that's what they have to watch for. So yeah. So, I probably will be posting one of my teal journeys soon, talking about the end of chemo. Unfortunately, exhaustion has gotten the best of me, and I haven't been doing them lately. But anyways, I thank everybody for listening, and I will turn it back to you, Sai.
So, yeah, we got about 5 minutes left here. So, I guess I will just kind of leave it off with make your own decisions and have informed consent. We have whistleblown. It would be great if people could go rally around Simona Bearcub and follow her and uplift the different videos and information that Simona's sharing. And I really just want to say that that's what we're here to do. There's got to be people that are willing to hold the line for this. And if I have to be the bad guy, and I mean, I get to stand beside somebody that's really badass, and I would stand by Simona any day of the week because I know that's the real deal. Like, the kinds of things I've seen this person do in the time that I've known them is it's really just there's some people that just really they do more than inspire you. They really get you to put yourself to action and find where you can belong in that. And I feel very honored to be able to do that. But it's ultimately a love of humanity and actually, like, I mean, I put it I shared some of my story again. There's another Instagram and TikTok reel where I talk. It's from 10 years ago, and it's where I talked about a little bit about my own child history of some of these things, which is not something I talk about a hell of a lot. But I mean, I've let everybody know I've been a victim in life, but I haven't elaborated. So this video here that I have, the summary is basically the video was made 10 years ago. I do not share it often nor widely, and in light of current events, I've reposted it now. It was originally posted when the Me Too movement was going viral. I do not post it for sympathy, and I did not post it for eyes. I post it for victims who have not yet found their voice and who I advocate for daily, because I do not want any other person to ever feel the way I was made to feel in life. It's like, because I do not ever want any person to have to tell the truth and be shunned, ostracized, and want to unalive themselves like I did when I was just a girl. And the bottom line is this: if you do not listen to victims, you are no advocate. And that's just the raw, honest truth. And these are people who are talking about the Epstein files and Epstein cases while having done similar types of atrocious, just horrible things. And like Bev, you said, it's not, you can't come back from that. That's why there are restrictions when you go on the registry, and you cannot. And this person is also already, we got some information that I haven't fully confirmed, but supposedly, allegedly, also broke their parole when they were originally released because they got a job that was too close to a school. And so this is showing, this pattern I've been talking about. These are things that they have to sign release forms and to have to understand the terms of their parole. They have to register. They have to not do certain things. And prohibition of using made products applies to convicted offenders of this case. This is simply the facts. And so I don't know if this ever gets to the parole officer who's responsible for this person. If it ever does, I'm pretty sure that there's some things that could be done here, that need to be done here. What do you think about that, Bev, as we close up?
Absolutely. I think that this is definitely a situation that someone is going to eventually have to step in, that because of the legal violations. And, having worked with the system, people don't just get out of these situations looking great. And, sometimes people can get away with things, but, eventually consequences catch up with people. And, like I said, there are people that can rehabilitate, there are people that can, become better people, can come beyond what they've done, but they still have to accept the consequences that what they did was what they did. And you can't just erase that just because you've found a better way. But with other actions, that in this case, it doesn't seem that it has been a case of rehabilitation at all. So that's my thought.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with that. So yeah, we have had a heavy topic here tonight on Around the Table with the AOTR, and honestly, it needed to be talked about. But as always, tune in bi-weekly, and we will be back here to talk again, hopefully with Dr. Nelva Lee, like we were originally going to, and maybe some more lighthearted topics, which will still be about intersectionality and everything that we always discuss here. But until then, I hope everyone is having a great start to this beautiful month of May, and I really look forward to hearing about your journey moving forward and completing your final round of chemotherapy. I will be meditating for you as always, Bev.
And of course, I appreciate any good thoughts or in my direction because I could use them. But yeah.
All right, well, that's been a wrap, and we'll see you next time on Around the Table with the AOTR. Have a good night.